Apologetics is about how best to help people understand the Christian faith in the context of the culture within which they live. So you try to connect it with the worldviews and the ideas that people have, the scientific level of scientific knowledge and all of that. So that's what apologetics is about. Yeah. Okay. So today's topic, Dr. McGrath refers to them as pointers to faith, making sense of life and our experience of the world. It's kind of a continuation of my sermon last Sunday, where I talked about a number of things that I'm going to bring up here too. But the idea is that there are certain things we know about life. And every cultural group, every religion, every person, if they're not religious, they have a philosophy, they have a philosophical outlook. Everybody's got a worldview of some kind to help them make sense of what they know about life, right? Some people try to make sense of it with just using scientific knowledge. Some people try to make sense of it through political ideologies. Others, it's a religious point of view. So what we're going to do here is we're going to connect things we know about life and what we experience about ourselves to demonstrate how the Christian faith can help us make sense of life and its experiences as we know it. The first thing I need to tell you is we're not going to prove anything. This is not about proving anything, okay? There have been proofs for the existence of God offered. For example, Thomas Aquinas, one of the smartest guys who ever lived, but he lived back in the 1200s, so that's some time ago. He had what he called five proofs for the existence of God. Okay, and one of them I put in here. Not everybody's convinced by them, though. You see, that's the thing. Because it kind of depends on your presuppositions, what you think about things. Okay, let me begin in this way. Aristotle was a 5th century BC philosopher. Had a major impact on Western Europe in the High Middle Ages. From the 1100s, 1200s, 1300s, prior to the Reformation. Aristotle had an enormous, his books had kind of been lost to Western history, but the Muslim community kept track of Aristotle. And when there was a period in the Middle Ages, you know, when Islam spread all the way throughout Spain. And so there was intercourse between Muslims and Christians in the Middle Ages, okay? And the discovery of Aristotle in the Middle Ages by the Christian community was life-changing for the Western world. All right. Aristotle believed that the universe, everything that exists, has always been here. It's just eternal. There never was a time when the universe wasn't here, and there will never be a time when the universe will not be here. It's just always here. Okay, so scientists accepted that assumption for years, and years and years and years, until they developed more sophisticated ways of studying the stars and the galaxies. I'm going to just give you one example. so you have some idea of what I'm talking about. The telescopes got more sophisticated, right? You could see more and you could see more detail. And one of the things that the modern telescopes did is they measured the motion of the stars. The stars are all moving. They're moving like when you blow up a balloon, it goes like this. That's the way the universe is moving. Okay? So, they call it the red shift. You can see a red shift in the pictures they take. The galaxies, the stars, everything is moving away from its center. It's gravity that holds it all together, just like it's gravity that holds the Earth to the sun. Okay, but gravity isn't strong enough to stop it from expanding. That's why I mentioned that cosmological constant. If gravity were weaker, the universe would cave in on itself. No, it would disperse. If gravity were stronger, it would cave in on itself. It's just right so that you can maintain life for a certain period of time. But looking into the future, measuring the speed of the stars in the galaxies now, scientists can predict how many billions of years before the universe will cease to exist. It will eventually cease to exist. Okay. All right, so that's just one piece of the evidence that eventually led to the theory of the Big Bang, about which I'm sure you all know. Okay, the idea is that at some point in time there was a Big Bang, and that's why everything's moving away from it's expanding. Just like an explosion, it expands. And they've got so much detail down now that they know when the elements in the universe were created. They know, what has happened down to a fraction of a second after the Big Bang. That's how much knowledge they've garnered since. But the thing is that when they finally had to accept the fact that the universe was not eternal, that it had a beginning, this was really hard for scientists to accept, because anything that has a beginning has a cause. So now the question is, what is the cause of the beginning of the universe? We can't see before the Big Bang. We have no idea what was before the Big Bang. So, what is the cause of the Big Bang? One scientist, Riley, commented, "We've been climbing the mountain of knowledge of the universe all these centuries, and we finally got to the top, and there was a bunch of theologians already there." Okay, so that's one way in which Christianity, or Judaism for that matter, or Islam for that matter, makes sense of the universe. Because we have always believed that the universe was created by God, which means it would have a beginning. Okay, but we had to, before we could get beyond Aristotle and his eternal theory, we had to have the evidence. Okay, well now it's there. All right, so that's one way in which the biblical worldview makes sense of what we know about reality. Another one is those cosmological constants. I'm not going to get into those because I did that last week, But like I said, the force of gravity, the mass of subatomic particles, all of these things, if they were even slightly different, carbon-based life could not exist. Which suggests that there is intelligent design in creation. Because the theory that this could have randomly happened, like when you throw dice, you know, it's random what comes up. The theory that these constants, which make life possible, could have just randomly happened after the Big Bang. That theory is so remote that you can hardly even measure how remote it is. So many people have come to the conclusion that the only explanation there is that there's an intelligent designer. But that doesn't necessarily lead to Christianity, right? There's a number of religions that would be perfectly happy with an intelligent designer, because it doesn't tell you anything about who the intelligent designer is. It just tells you there is one. And some scientists don't even accept that. They won't go there because science can't confirm it. They won't go any place where science can't confirm. And science can't confirm that there's an intelligent designer, but, like I say, the chances of otherwise are extremely remote. Okay, so, scientific advancements thus far from being in contradiction with the Bible, are very consistent with it. There's no war between Christianity and science. They complement each other. The doctrines we've always believed in. Now, that presupposes that when we read the text of the Bible, we understand the historical context within which it was written. If you don't understand that, you're going to misapply it. Let me give you an extremely distressing example of that. All right, in the Old South, there were 3 arguments for why slavery was a good thing. They didn't just say it wasn't bad, they said it was a positive good. That's what they wanted to argue. One of the arguments was the curse that Noah put on his son. It was Noah, wasn't it? Yeah, his son Ham. Okay, so the theory back in the 1860s, before we knew as much as we know about the history of Israel now, was that black Africans are descendants of Ham. Therefore, they suffered from this curse. See? Well, it turns out that whenever you read in the Hebrew Bible about someone or some group of people who are not highly esteemed, to say the least, by the ancient Hebrews, you know it's referring to a group of people that they are fighting with. The correct interpretation of that text actually is that Ham was the ancestor of the Canaanite people from whom the ancient Hebrews were taking the land. That's the correct understanding. But back then they didn't know that. So they misapplied it and used it to justify a heinous thing. Okay, so, but we have to go beyond, like I say, we have to go beyond science to talk about the ways in which life as we experience it that Christianity can help us understand better life as we experience it. So for example, let me ask you a question. Do you think creation is meaningful? Is it meaningful?
Yeah, I think it is.
Where does it get its meaning?
Well, how did we get here if there weren't a creation?
You're using the same argument I just used. Exactly. That's the other thing, the idea that creation has a creator. The other important issue that addresses is whether or not creation is meaningful. If it's random, or if, like Aristotle thought, it was always here and would never disappear, where would you find a foundation for the meaning of all of this beauty around us? The biblical worldview gives us ground to stand on to say life is meaningful. Okay? Let me ask you another question. Why is it that the human mind, okay, we have what used to be called a rational soul. We can think. We have reason. The purest form of reason is mathematics. Okay? Why is it that our ability to use reason and understand mathematics at very complicated levels for some people, not for me, but for some people, why does that correspond to the way nature works? In other words, we understand nature precisely because we understand math and can reason. That's how we understand. That's how we can understand physics, for example. You reduce it to a mathematical formula. So why does creation mirror the way the human mind works? Can you think of a biblical passage that might shed some light on this? In whose image were we created? That's right. Okay? Now that opens up a whole range of things. When you think about being created in the image of God, it makes sense that a creature created in the image of God would have a rational soul that corresponds to the way in which the Creator made the creation. That makes sense. But the other side of it is that we also are more than just our rational soul. We have a heart. We have passions. We have feelings. We're attracted to things. We have desires. So, for example, we talked a little bit about this last week, but I want to bring it up again in a wider scope. Take the issue of beauty. Okay? How does our desire for beauty manifest itself in our everyday lives? Because it does. In just about everything we do. Can you think of something? How about your yard? Do you want your yard to be beautiful? Do you want your house to be beautiful? How about your furniture? How about the meal you make for your family when they go home? Do you want that to look really good?
We want to look good ourselves, too.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look in the mirror.
Oh, no.
Last week I didn't want to look in the mirror. Okay? Beauty affects everything. Everything. And beauty has caused we as a country, as well as countries all over the world, to preserve the most spectacular spots on the planet so that they will not be developed, so that what? Every generation can behold that beauty. For a creature created in the image of God, it would make sense that we are attracted and desirous of beauty. To behold beauty, to possess beauty, to be in the presence of beauty in all of its forms, precisely because what is the most beautiful vision a human being could possibly have? The most beautiful vision of all. God. It's called the beatific vision. Yeah. And it also makes sense when you consider the biblical story that human beings were made for a place called paradise. Jesus himself used that word when he talked to the criminal, remember? Today you will be with me in paradise?
Yeah.
Okay? Paradise is a place of beauty. And the beatific vision is the most beautiful vision a person could have. We're attracted, okay, so where does this inborn attraction for beauty come from? Well, we were created, number one, we're created in the image of God. Number two, we were created for a what with God? A relationship, that's right. We created for a relationship. Now, this is where you begin to get into the details of Christianity specifically. Because when you argue about a first cause to creation, that's just a God. Christianity defines who God is through the revelation recorded in Scripture, both Old and New Testament, primarily through Jesus Christ. Okay? And the way it portrays the nature of who God is first a person, not an impersonal force. Not like Star Wars, right? May the force be with you. God isn't like that. Jesus said, God has counted the hairs on your head. Okay, so that's number one. God relates to us personally. Number two, God desires us to relate to him. Because commandment number one is love the Lord your God more than anything else. Number two, God has sent his Son to die for us. He wants us to be related to him so passionately that he's willing to give up the life of his Son so that we can be reconciled to God and have a relationship with God based on the free gift of God's what? Grace and love. All right? And that brings me to the next idea about how Christianity can be made understandable to people who don't know anything about it or whose understanding of it is distorted. Most people I have spoken to who have spoken disparagingly about either the faith or the Bible don't know a thing about it. What's the most owned and unread book?
The Bible.
The Bible. Yeah. Okay, it's still the world's bestseller, but I don't know how many people are reading it. Anyway, okay, so that brings me to another inborn human, what it means to be human. What makes us, of all the things you can think of, okay, what's the thing that comes to mind that you would say makes people happy? Love. Exactly. Love. We were made to be loved. Everybody wants to be loved. not only our attraction to beauty, but our need for love and our desire to be in communities where people love each other corresponds precisely to Jesus' answer to the question, what is the greatest commandment? That's right. 2 simple commandments. Love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself. Okay? Does anybody in here think the world would be different if people actually did that?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Too bad you can't
Now-
teach the mind.
Now what that means is, okay, in the modern world, we talk about what used to be called just plain evil. We talk about it more in terms of mental health. Okay, so when there's another mass shooting, and did you know there's one every 6 days in this country?
No.
So the world as we know it is anything but what Jesus said is authentically human. To be an authentic human being, you love God first and your neighbor as yourself. That's what it means to be human. And that's why he said the most meaningful life is a life of service to your neighbor in your community. Because that's how you show love. You do things for people. So, what Thomas Jefferson called the pursuit of happiness is actually the inborn human desire to find, let me put it this way. People sometimes define happiness as moments of great pleasure. And I'm happy during moments of during a great meal or a very entertaining movie or play or symphony or whatever. But the problem is, here's how I'm going to define the problem. I'm going to tell you about my boys when they were little. I used to take them to Disneyland a couple times a year, back when it didn't cost $1 million. Yeah. And we'd go down on President's Day weekend, we'd go down at some point in the summer. The problem is that when it was time to leave Disneyland, guess who was depressed?
Guess what?
Who was depressed?
You?
No, the
Well,
kids.
you were the boys, yeah, they loved it so much. It's like living on another planet when you're in that place, right? It's a fantasy world.
Yeah.
And my boys just soaked it up when they were 9 and 11. They just loved it at that age. And then we'd fly back to the Bay Area and, oh. Okay, so here's the thing. Moments of pleasure in life can give you momentary happiness. What it can't do is fulfill your ultimate desire, which is for an unchangeable, unending sense of joy and fulfillment. Every human being has that. Every human being is searching for that. Every human being thinks they can find it in something. Okay? Well, if you believe that we were created in the image of God and for a relationship with the eternal God who loves us so much that he counts the hairs on our head, that would suggest that that desire is an inborn desire for God. Because you're not going to find it anyplace else. Okay? The philosopher Plato. Any of you ever read Plato's books? Yeah? A little bit? Plato had a triad. Okay, now he was before Christ. And he was a Greek, he was not a Hebrew, so he knew nothing about the Old or New Testament. He was before. Plato though, had a lot of insight about human nature. It's that human beings, by nature, seek three things. And these three things are
Truth, beauty, and goodness.
yes, truth, beauty, and goodness. Thank you. Truth, beauty, and goodness. Okay? So, when you're sitting on a jury, okay, those of you who have done jury duty, you know you've got a pretty heavy responsibility. If it's a serious trial, you've got a pretty heavy responsibility. If there's millions of dollars at stake in a lawsuit, or if there's the potential for going away to prison for 20 years, or maybe even life, you know. I was called in once for jury duty in a case where the prosecution was going to ask for the death penalty. That was before Gavin Newsom did away with it. Okay, they were going to ask for the death penalty, and when they interviewed me, I was able to get out of there right away. Because they found out I was a minister. Forget it, this guy's going to vote against it. Okay. So, but when you're in the jury and you're deliberating on the evidence, what do you want to make sure you don't do? It's just born into you. Nobody has to tell you. What do you want to make sure you don't do?
Make a mistake.
Make a mistake so that the truth does not come out. You're looking for the truth. That's what you want. Before you can make a judgment, you have to be convinced of what the truth is. Okay? So let me ask you this question. Plato calls it goodness. We sometimes refer to it as a moral vision, our morality, our ethics, what we consider right versus wrong. Okay. What is the foundation? Let me ask you, put it this way. I'm always trying to take my glasses off still. Prove to me that stealing is wrong. Give me the proof. Okay, I'm from another planet. I just landed here. I was going to just walk in the store and take some things and walk out. And you tell me, no, you can't do that. That's wrong. And I say, prove it.
And you're saying as opposed to it's against the law. You're saying
Yeah.
what inherently makes it wrong.
What inherently makes it wrong.
Belongs to somebody else.
If everybody did it, it would not be sustainable. If everybody was stealing, then nobody could have property and nobody would have a reason to work.
You're going to roll.
Those are all valid arguments, but I'm not sure from the point of view of a thief that they would work. Because for the thief, he thinks stealing is good because he gets something for nothing. Right? My point is this. We have an inborn sense of right and wrong. Okay? It used to be called natural law.
Natural what?
Law. The objective basis for morality in the Western world was natural law.
As opposed to conscience?
No,
Same thing?
I'm not done yet.
Okay.
You're right.
Sorry.
That's the external, the objective source. The internal source is your conscience. Yeah. Okay? Your conscience tells you what is right and wrong. So if a rapist comes to me and asks me, well, what's wrong with that? It satisfies my desire to control another human being in whatever way I want. What's wrong with that? Well, if you don't have a conscience, you would probably say, go ahead and do it, right? It's your conscience that tells you it's wrong. Which means that when people do not have a conscience, or when they act in ways as if their conscience doesn't matter, like a mass shooter does, what do we call them? Mentally ill. We use the model health and sickness, right? Okay? So, in order to be a healthy, authentic human being, the way God created you to be, what do you have to have? A conscience. That's exactly right. Okay? That's how we know what is right from wrong. Okay? And the natural law idea, the source of that is that virtually every culture on the planet that has lasted for any period of time, they have all known the basic codes of right and wrong that everybody accepts. You know, you don't steal, you don't murder, you don't lie in a court of law, you take care of your parents when they're unable to care for themselves, etc., as it's all in the Ten Commandments. Right? Okay, so here's where Christianity once again connects with what we know about life. We know about right and wrong intuitively, and the Christian faith teaches us that love and service of others, rather than hatred, violence, and name-calling, is right. And your conscience tells you the same thing. We just use, we use the healthy, sick model to refer to it now. Okay, so if you take it all together, I might have left some out, but you can read the essay. If you take it all together, our desire for, the fact that everything has to have a cause, and the universe has a beginning, so it has to have a cause. The cosmological constants, the inborn human nature we have, the desire for love and beauty and truth, the foundation of our ethics, our conscience, our desire to relate to something that is a source of eternal, unchanging joy, not just a fleeting joy that's we have for a week and then it's gone. All of this are ways of explaining why the Christian faith it doesn't prove anything, but what it does do is explain why the Christian faith works for people.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you were talking earlier about, do you think of Christianity as complex or as simple?
Okay, I think of it as ultimately simple, but there are times when questions are asked where you have to get into some complexity. But ultimately, I think it's simple in the sense that Christianity diagnoses the world as it exists now as a place where people are infected with sin. And all you have to do is look at the news to know that. Okay? Christianity tells us that there's a God who's the cause behind creation. And scientists know there was a beginning to creation, and that creation just happened to work out perfectly to sustain life. Christianity tells us that we innately desire to be loved and to love in return. And those are the two commandments. So in that sense, it's simple. Yeah. But when you start getting into, like for example, the meaning of revelation, you know what revelation is? The disclosure of God in Jesus Christ. You can get pretty complex when you start getting into that. Yeah, there are portions of the Bible where it gets very complex. And you have to know history and
Symbolism.
yeah, we just got through with a book that's nothing but symbolism. The Bible can be very complex, but its basic message can be boiled down to those simple points I made. The world is infected by something called sin that alienates it from its creator. Its creator loves the people the creator made in his own image, and therefore our desire for redemption, which is our desire for an unending source of joy and happiness, our desire for redemption corresponds to what God actually has done for us in Jesus Christ. So that all fits together in a simple way. So for folks who want to enjoy, here's the passages I would suggest if you want to just read something that's not hard to understand, and that's fun, actually fun to read. Okay, the narratives about King David in the books of Samuel are fascinating. I mean, the plot lines, the action, all the activity, everything David does, everything he accomplishes, and the sins he commits too, by the way. It's the way it's written is, whoever wrote it was a great writer. So I would suggest reading the stories of King David and Solomon, for that matter. It gets a little more complicated after that. The Psalms are always good to read because they're spirituality. And there's a psalm for every feeling that we go through. You know, whether you're joyful, grateful, depressed, anxious, whatever you are, there's a psalm for it. So the Psalms are great. And you don't have to be a theologian to benefit from the psalm. And then I would say that there are certain lyrical passages in the Apostle Paul. Paul can get very complex in his theology. Okay, so some parts of Paul are hard to understand, but he does get lyrical at times, where he's just bursting with joy, like the 8th chapter of Romans. Nothing in all creation can separate us from the love of Christ. And then he lists everything. If you want a spiritual experience, and you don't need to know the history, I mean, you can understand some of the things Jesus says more fully if you know the history. But you don't need to know the history. If you're looking for an in-depth spiritual experience that isn't hard to understand, the Gospel of John is a good source.
Gospel of John.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming and sticking it out, and I'll let you know the specifics of the next class in the Voice of Hope, as well as the bulletin In fact, I'll probably send you all an email. How does that sound? Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.